Philosophers are kind-hearted sorts of chaps, willing to help others into the paragraphs, but there is still something mad about them, with their ludicrous stiff solemnity and air of paragraph importance. They pity past generations, who lived when the system was presumably not finished, and when, therefore, unbiased objectivity was not yet possible. But when you ask them about the new system, they always put you off with the same excuse. No, it is not yet quite ready. The system is almost finished, or at least under construction, and will be finished by next Sunday. Soren Kierkegaard. Postscript. Forward. Why does anyone start to read philosophy? Yet I myself was introduced to philosophy by 3 books. The first was André Malraux's Man's Estate, La Condition Humaine, in translation. The second was Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, and the third was Plato's Republic. Naturally, one did not read these books. Man's Estate is a typically French ornate work of little purpose, wordy, complex, and dull. Russell is far, far too long, like a lecture that should have ended an hour ago. And Plato's Republic, although full of ideas, seems to be written in a kind of code. Nonetheless, each book served a useful purpose. The first, although unreadable, was small and imposing enough to carry around. The second was informative, if rather soporific, and the third was somehow fascinating, if rather strange and resolutely obscure. But here we have philosophical tales, which I hope can combine all 3 functions, the 3 positive ones, that is. It is small enough to carry around and impress people. It is quite informative, and lastly, most importantly, it is full of strange and obscure philosophical tidbits. Now, some people will say that they are too advanced to need tidbits. They want full-blown lengthy treatises. Why should someone who wants to read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason in the original gobbledygook need to know that he considered coffee to be poisonous and rolled himself 3 times in his sheets every night before sleeping? Why would someone who could understand Hegel's Die Phänomenologie des Geistes, phenomenology of spirit, want to know that he came up with his theory that society is rooted in conflict while working as a schoolteacher? Or why even that the quintessential British rationalist, John Stuart Mill, exponent of the dry theory known as utilitarianism, actually considered poetry to be the most philosophic of all writing? So what if Mill wrote to his friend Wordsworth, author of the Daffodils poem, to say that he had shown him that poetry is truth, not individual and local, but general, not standing upon external testimony, but carried alive into the heart by passion? For this, the conventional histories tell us, was an aberration, a momentary weakness. So here is an alternative account of philosophers with human frailties, a portrait that may sometimes undermine their status as moral arbiters, sometimes as path-breaking theorists. But then, for all people tell us, philosophers are not a separate race. They are creatures like the rest of us, created on this planet, even if they often claim authority over it, children growing into men and women with experiences, influences, and most evidently, prejudices. Aristotle did not reflect Greek views of racial superiority, he invented them. John Locke and Bishop Berkeley were also aware of the dubious nature of their profits from the slave trade. Marx did not spend his time solely in the British Library, but liked his cigars, his beer, and his women too, more so in fact than providing for his children, several of whom died of malnutrition. These personal details do not speak only of unimportant trivialities, but give insights into the big picture. For, as Sherlock Holmes remarked in The Case of Identity, it has long been an axiom of mine that the little things are infinitely the most important. At the same time, the true story of philosophy is less the story of individuals than of ideas, and more particularly, ideas being stolen, borrowed, and twisted. It is interesting to see that Descartes' great cogito really came from Augustine. whose interests were not the foundations of knowledge at all. Augustine was content to think his thoughts were divinely inspired. Or more recently, that Wittgenstein borrowed his mysterious category of things that must remain silent from another Austrian fantasist called Otto Weininger. And it is the story of ideas lost, too. So that although Plato had raised the possibility that women might have the same souls as men, Aristotle successfully came up with good philosophical reasons as to why only men's ideas should hold court, explaining that women have fewer teeth, no souls, and their hearts do not beat. And it is his assumptions that have shaped philosophy ever since. So here women will only play a bit part. Hypatia, Harriet Taylor Mill, Mrs. Marx, and Sartre's companion appear, but only fleetingly, only in the background. Would that it were not so. But men wrote the history of philosophy, and history is where our tales come from.